Welcome to Three Count Commentaries, the first ever Q&A edition. So there's about 15 to 16 questions here, at least. I looked at some of these. I didn't read them all, but I kind of saw them as they popped up on my screen. Some of them. Other ones are going to be a complete surprise to me. So I'm going to try to do at least one of these a month, just because I think that they're interesting and they're kind of fun and they give me something to do. So let's get started, man. Why waste time? So, DOP, or DOP, however that thing goes. If you were booking AEW, what would be your plans for Adam Cole from the moment he debuted? Here's the thing I think they did wrong. I think they debuted Adam Cole too soon. I know they wanted to strike while the iron was hot, but here's the idea that I had. I think I had this idea when I was at work. I was just kind of standing there brain dead for a minute. And I said to myself, what would have been cool if Tony Khan really knew that his plan was to switch the title between Kenny Omega and Adam Cole. I mean, Kenny Omega and Hangman Page. Then he didn't need to really bring in Adam Cole. So my idea would have been to basically tell everybody Adam Cole is coming, but to only put out vignettes. To put out vignettes that features like a shadowy figure playing cards or something like that, to continue the casino style theme that AEW loves. They love the casino ladder matches and the poker chips and the double or nothing and everything. Just have a guy sitting there playing cards, but you can't see who he is. And he flips over a card or something like that, and it was the ace. They also love to do Japanese stuff, like the Four Pillars is based off of Japan. So you could call the top guy the ace, right? So the guy flips over the card, it's the ace. And all of a sudden, Kenny Omega starts calling himself the ace of the elite, the ace of AEW, etc., etc. And then, as time goes on, the guy keeps flipping over the ace. It's like 4 aces in the deck. So that gives you 4 weeks or 4 months, however that thing will go. And after Kenny Omega loses to Hangman Page, you could do the same thing that they already did with the Young Bucks forgiving Hangman for costing him the title shot, all that stuff. You can still do your Elite Civil War, but the moment they have the argument that Kenny Omega gets in the Young Bucks' face, and they can say, "Look, we're tired of you. For months we were behind you. We kept, you kept calling yourself the Ace of the Elite. You were never the Ace of the Elite." And then you lower the boom. That's when you introduce Adam Cole, and you have Adam Cole and the Young Bucks, the Super Clique, versus Kenny Omega and the Good Brothers. And I think if you have that situation, that would have been a lot more interesting. Because you would have introduced Adam Cole, still with the Young Bucks, but at a higher point as the replacement for Kenny Omega. Then, because of course Kenny Omega, I think they've been saying Kenny Omega was beat up for a long time. So it wasn't like it was a complete and total surprise that he was going to be gone for a while. So you just use Adam Cole essentially to replace Kenny Omega. You do a series of matches. You give Kenny Omega a break, but you do a series of matches, 6-man tags, stuff like that, tag team matches, leading to the one-on-one match where Adam Cole defeats Kenny Omega and assumes the spot as the head of the Elite. Then maybe even you have the Good Brothers turn on Kenny Omega. Then from there, you have Kenny Omega, who has been beaten down, he's busted up, he's got nobody, he's got nothing. And his last act before he goes off to have surgery or whatever, he goes to Hangman Page. And he says, "Look, I know my ego got out of control. All this stuff I did to you, I forgot that we were really friends. And I forgot who my friends were. I found out that the Young Bucks weren't my friends, that the Good Brothers weren't my friends. The only person I got left is you. I want you to become the Ace of the Elite. You, the AEW World Champion, have to be the Ace of the Elite. You got to be the best of the best. You have to be the guy that beats Adam Cole." And that's how you set that up for maybe not the next pay-per-view. I think the pay-per-view after Full Gear, I think it's Revolution. I think that's where you do the 6-man tag. And then, or maybe the one-on-one match between Adam Cole and Kenny Omega. And then whatever pay-per-view is after that. I think it's Double or Nothing is after that. So then I think you do Double or Nothing, Hangman Page versus Adam Cole for the AEW World title. And that gives you some chances to have CM Punk and have Bryan Danielson, and they can do their thing. but you also bring in Adam Cole at a specific point in time with a specific storyline just for him. And of course, I would give him the belt, but that would be, cut off Adam Cole's, all this bullshit with him and the Young Bucks, with him, being kissed on the cheeks every week. It was absolutely stupid. And I feel like it was a waste of his time. All right. Jesus Leva. What is your earliest memory of wrestling that made you a fan? Mine was Hogan versus Warrior in 1990. Well, mine was similar. Mine was actually the Royal Rumble 1990. I remember I did not have that many memories of wrestling before 1990. I remember we were at my dad's cousin's house, and he had ordered the Royal Rumble, and they were having grown-up parties and all that kind of stuff, and all the kids were just shuffled into a room, and they turned the Royal Rumble on. And I couldn't tell you what else was on the show, but I remember Royal Rumble 1990, and I remember really being excited by it, and it was like awesome. And Hogan wins, of course, and then it was like this big ordeal, and it's like the orgasmic reaction and everything, and I was like, oh my god, I had kind of seen wrestling up to that point on television. Like, I watched it here and there. I, of course, had action figures. You would think that I was already a wrestling fan, but I was like 6 at this point. You'd already think I was a wrestling fan. It's like Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles to me, where I saw the cartoon here and there. I had the toys, but I didn't know anything about it. It was just, my mom was like, what are boys into? Oh, boys are into Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, all right? So he's into it too. And it was kind of like, oh, okay, so I got this little green thing with the with a red sash on his face. I'm like, oh, okay, cool. Whatever. But Royal Rumble 1990 is what really made me a fan. WrestleMania 8 is when I was like, all right, this is my thing. This is my jam. But WrestleMania 21 made me what I am right now. Because I had gone through that point in time where I didn't watch wrestling anymore. I actively avoided wrestling for a long time. I really just read dirt sheets. So I know, like, a lot of people who say, oh, I don't watch wrestling anymore. I just listen to the dirt sheets. I was that guy, but it was in like 2000, 2001. So from like 99 to like 2005, I didn't really watch wrestling at all. So I had to go back and catch up on a lot of stuff. And what really got me into it was I had heard about Shawn Michaels versus Kurt Angle. I was like, damn, I want to hear that. I want to see that. I had heard Shawn Michaels that came back, but I didn't hear too much more about it. And then I heard, crazy stuff. I was being framed. When you frame something from it, people give you information, but they give you information in a fucked up way. Like, they would tell me, guess who the WWE champion is? I'm like, who? They're like, Eddie Guerrero. I'm like, the mid-carder from WCW? Yup. And they're like, oh, I'm not watching that shit. What the fuck am I watching that shit for? Bradshaw is the world champion? Ugh, this company's about to go out of business. And that's kind of how I had the attitude. I was not watching Raw at all, because Triple H was like, I was done with Triple H. But my earliest memory, of course, is some Royal Rumble 1990. That made me so much. It was so much. It's such a fun event. 1990 through 1994 was so much fun. It was full of stupid shit, but it was such a fun time. 95, oh boy. Oh boy. All right, Bradley Gamble. Who will take control of WWE when Vince dies, and who would you prefer to take control? All right, so here's the thing. I think Vince does so many different things. Vince's job is going to get broken up into different people. I think the person who actually is going to run the company, that's going to do the budgeting and all that kind of stuff, all the behind the scenes stuff that Vince does, that's probably going to be kicked over to Nick Khan or some other empty suit. Wrestling people aren't going to be running the company anymore. It's going to be corporate people. The wrestling part is probably going to be split into the regular creative team, where you're probably going to still have a member of the McMahon family running creative. Will it be Stephanie? Probably not. Will it be Triple H? Probably not. But I think there will some amalgamation of the guys that are left behind, like Bruce and Triple H and Stephanie and some other people, will be running the creative end. And I think that is going to be how it's going to end up working. And of course, Kevin Dunn's going to continue to run the production and all that kind of stuff. I think that it would be smart to, if when Vince dies, to just continue this blow the thing up and revamp everybody that he was keeping in place, like Kevin Dunn. That would be the first thing I would do, is get rid of Kevin Dunn. So who would I prefer to run WWE? That's a really good question, because without knowing Triple H's health, it's hard to tell. Like, can he really handle running the company from a productions or in creative standpoint? I don't know. If NXT was any indication, probably not a good idea to have Triple H running the show. But I think it's also not a good idea to let Bruce run the show. I think you probably need to bring Paul in. Paul hangs around there long enough, a seat will open, and they'll call him to sit down. Maybe he doesn't have too much heat with Stephanie and Vince, and and all that. Shane is another good one. But I really think WWE needs to be split into the corporate side and the wrestling side, because the corporate side, which handles all the branding and all that kind of shit, all of those people are going to be different from the people who run the wrestling part. The people who run the wrestling part is going to be the problem, because it's a machine, but the wrestling part is going to be very difficult, because WWF has run for a long time off of Vince McMahon's vision. And without that vision, without that guiding light, it's going to be a trouble. Because who's next? Whose philosophy is going to replace it? And that's going to be the question. It's not going to be whether it's going to be good or bad. It's going to be wholly different, because somebody's going to have a completely different philosophy of the business. Vince is a carny. He's also a sociopath in some ways. But he's also been running a company that has done great philanthropy, even though some of it is for marketing purposes. But he's always done philanthropy. He did it even before Stephanie did that stupid tweet. They've been doing Make-A-Wish and all that kind of stuff for the troops and stuff since the early 90s, So it was before Stephanie did that stupid tweet. But ultimately, a lot of the McMahons are problems. They're problematic. The whole entire McMahon family is problematic. If Linda hadn't walked away, I think she probably would take over as chairman of the board. But I think she walked off, and if Vince is gone and Linda is still around, she's probably not going to want anything to do with it. But I think she was, partly running the company for a little while there, especially when Vince was in trouble. So I think it's going to be a group of people. I would rather it not be, and them pick somebody. Triple H is probably the best option we got. As far as people we know can run a wrestling company, at least to some level of success, even though NXT ended up cratering, it still ran pretty smooth for about 4 or 5 years. Like NXT built some momentum, and he was able to capitalize on that momentum. And it wasn't until somebody came in his lane and started doing the exact same thing he was doing, which is what AEW did, that he ended up getting knocked off and started, spazzing out. Things went real left when he couldn't just go out and sign all the hottest free agents anymore. AEW started doing that. So then it was kind of like, okay, we can't have the big reveal at takeovers anymore. We can't, it's people complaining that, NXT is too dark. Just about everything that they could complain about, they did complain about. And it really just kind of hindered the growth of NXT. And the continued growth of NXT. Now people hate it without even really watching the product, which I think is actually in some ways a little bit better than what it used to be. All right. Synonymous TV. In your opinion, what makes a rapper a lyricist? This is one of his, I think, 4 or 5 questions. All right. So in your opinion, what makes a rapper a lyricist? I think if you are a lyricist, doesn't worry too much about the beat selection. When you listen to like lyrical rapper like a Razzcast or a Cannabis or something like that, these guys they don't have good ears for beats. Not really. The beat is just a backdrop for what they're going to write down. And to them, what sounds good to them doesn't sound good to everyone else. So I think when you stumble across rappers who care so much, they're meticulous about their lyrics too. Like when you sit back, I think, what was it? I think it was The Art of Rap with Ice-T. And he went and he started talking to all these rappers like Eminem and Rakim. And they talk about the time and effort they put into their lyrics. That's what lyricism is. And I'm talking when you can break down syllables. And how, and some guys, they get too nerdy with it. Like you get nerdy with anything. But I think that's really where it is when it comes to lyricist rappers. They're basically the nerds. And sometimes production guys get like that too. When they, like, if you sit back and you watch, God, it's the beat show where I watched Ninth Wonder make a beat. It was on Rhythm Roulette. That's what it's called. So if you watch like Rhythm Roulette, you can see the nerdy side of rap production, how they find samples, how they loop samples, what they're listening for, whether the guys got good ears or not. But lyricists don't really have good ears, and usually that was the knock on Nas for a long time, is that he didn't have a good ear for beats. What they weren't paying attention to is that Nas picked production that was complementary to what he was doing, not for danceable music, club music, or anything like that. It's not an instrumental album. He's writing lyrics to this stuff, so he wants you to pay attention to what he's saying. So he doesn't want the beat to overpower him. And I think that's something that people should think about too. Let's see. His second question. What are 2 ways you think WWE can improve their product and increase ratings? I think one thing that they could do right off the bat is better storytelling. If you're going to script everything, then you need to script the shit, and you need to follow the script. And stop tearing it up every week. Wrestling was so much better when they had taped shows, because they couldn't change shit. You taped an hour of Superstars or Wrestling Challenge or whatever the hell, but you probably ran a 4-hour show. So today, that's 1 episode of Raw. But back then, 20 some odd years ago, you have 4 episodes of Wrestling Challenge or something like that. That's 4 weeks of TV, because it was only 1 hour. Therefore, you're not changing the storyline once you decided what it was. You could drop it, but you at least were letting some of it play out before you dropped it. Here, they will change things day of, an hour before the show. They change the shit during the show. That creates all types of chaotic storytelling. Now, as a writer, I say, because I don't always script out everything that I do. Some writers outline and they follow their outline. Then you have other writers where if they come up with the finish to the book, they're not going to finish the book because it's like they spoiled it for themselves. Some writers need that. They need to have that endpoint. And you could tell that Vince used to be, and they used to talk about it all the time. You start from WrestleMania back, what's the main event you want for WrestleMania? And then you plot everything backwards. And I think that works. But I think with the internet and everybody trying to get everything spoiled, you can't really do that anymore. You can't sit down and plot out the entire show anymore. Because if you do, it gets spoiled. Some asshole would put the script online, and now TV for the next 6 months is spoiled. What can you do? So I think immediately what they can do to increase ratings and improve their product is to focus less on matches, more on characters, more on moments, and more on action. And action doesn't necessarily mean matches. Action can mean segments. Like, I really loved, and I know a lot of people didn't like it, though, Who Tried to Kill Roman Reigns thing. I thought that shit was excellent. It was silly. It was stupid. But it's action involved in that. In so much as you got, things falling. And Roman's acting like, trying to get away from things falling. Like, that's what the Attitude Era was filled with. That was the good thing about the Attitude Era. Is that there was always extra stuff happening. There was stuff happening backstage. There was stuff happening in the locker room. It was stuff happening in the ring, outside the ring. There was stuff happening in the crowd. You will always have interesting things popping up all over the place. And it wasn't always so much comedy, which I think is another thing that they could do without. They could do without so much comedy. I think that if things are funny, just let them be funny. But I think sometimes they try to script too much of comedy and be too much of a variety show. I think if they took things a lot more seriously, people would take a lot more seriously. Like, I think they equate comedy and fun, and comedy doesn't necessarily mean fun. Comedy is fun, for sure. If you sit down and you watch The Office or The Simpsons or Archer or something like that, it's fun to watch that stuff because it's comedic. But comedy, isn't the only thing that can be fun. Action is fun too. And AEW shows that, but they do it the wrong way by having like long, cold matches. You don't want to do that. That turns people away. do short matches and then have crazy stuff happen. Like you had Shotzi with a tank. Why couldn't she just go around shooting people with her tank, or running people over with her tank, or threatening to run people over with the tank, or whatever the case may be? Do some more soap opera stuff. Do some things with some relationships. People trying to steal other people's wives and stuff like that. Like, yeah, it pisses people off, but it engages people too. You need a hook. Every story needs to have a hook. Too often, these hooks are either weak or they're non-existent. You know, you need to start with a bang. Start every story with a bang. And then you carry people along with you. So I think that would increase ratings if you improve your storytelling. And you can improve your storytelling by having more action in your stories, having more things to do rather than more things to say. Show, don't tell. Like you can tell as much as you want, but you also want to make sure that you're showing more than you're telling. What is your craziest, funniest interaction you had with an AEW fan online? Oh my God. It was probably some of these dweebs on Twitter. I know that I had a conversation with that Jonathan Snowden guy. That was just absolutely absurd. When he tried to sell me on the Young Bucks being main event guys and worthy of being the EVPs of All Elite Wrestling. I was kind of like, they got them a billionaire mark. I mean, there's nothing wrong with that. That's how wrestling promotions are formed, really. One guy who knows a little bit about wrestling stumbles into somebody who's trying to get into the business. And he says, if you got the money, I got the time. And I'll teach you wrestling, and I'll be the top guy. You be the financier. It's what Jim Cornette did to Dave Rubin. Rick Rubin to form Smoky Mountain. It's what every time you saw one of these promoters, they try to go in and buy a promotion, they're usually going to bring a wrestling guy with them. There's a story in the Nitro book about Jerry Jarrett trying to buy WCW. And he went and found a financier. You would think Jerry Jarrett would have enough money to be able to buy WCW himself. But it wasn't about that. He wanted to have a business guy, and he would handle the wrestling part. So you need to have a business guy. You need to have the wrestling part. And with Tony Khan and the Young Bucks, he met wrestling guys in Cody and the Bucks and Kenny Omega and all them. And they convinced him, hey, we can make a go of this thing, and it can work. There's enough hardcore wrestling fans for it to work. And I think it's been proven that there are right now. But his mentality was that they were main event top level guys. And I was like, where were they main events? Like, where? I don't know. They were, every time I watched them in New Japan, they were in the opening act. And they were like the hangers on. Like, they didn't start the Bullet Club. They didn't make the Bullet Club popular either. So it was like, last time I saw those guys, they were jabronis in TNA. And then they were acting like they were big shots in New Japan. And even people who were big fans of New Japan were saying like they weren't much of a big deal, and that, wrestling hasn't changed with Cody and the Bucks being gone. Omega, sure, that kind of hurt them because they put so much effort into them. But Cody and the Bucks were negligible for New Japan. So that was probably the funniest. I had a lot of fun with that, which I can remember. I usually get blocked more than anything when it comes to the AEW fans. His final question: do you believe in God? My answer to that question is I was a atheist when I was 20. I declared myself an atheist. Then as I grew up, I kind of saw myself and I was like, you know what? It's not, I think the smartest, most intellectual position is to be agnostic, because you have to leave the door open that God exists. I don't think that there's any way for you to explain things that can't normally be explained. Like, it used to be believed that if you shoot somebody in the head, they're dead. But then you see people get shot in the head and they live. So you're like, okay, well, if that can happen, then miracles can happen. You've seen people, all type of things that are not likely actually occur. Now, when we get into the metaphysical aspects of it, like, guys dying and being raised from the dead, I don't know about that part. But as a spiritual being, does God exist? I say, I don't know. And I think it's an interesting question that I like to ponder from time to time. But it's also very interesting to ask the question, How does everything fit so wonderfully? And sometimes things fit so wonderfully as if they were designed, because you have to ask how does nature know that you need to have semen and eggs in order to recreate life, you know? And this is for every creature that, reproduces, with the exception of a few. I know there are some that can self reproduce. But dogs, mammals in general, need to have eggs and semen in order to reproduce. It's almost as if they were created that way, you know. So that's a good question. It's something I ponder pretty often. Let's see, Raw. He asked the question, any out of the box people you'd push in WWE or AEW? Absolutely. I talked on this channel a lot about Nick Comoroto, and most people are kind of like, what do you see about him? I'm like, have you seen him? He is a human wall of muscle. If he can put one foot in front of the other, you got a star. All he has to do is be able to move without falling down. And he's the biggest guy on the roster that they do nothing with. And he can't be that old. And all you have to do is just throw people at him. And he just clotheslines them. If he can actually do that successfully for 4 months, people will get behind him. You see what they did with Ryback in WWE, right? Like, feed me more. That's it. If he can do a clothesline and not fall down, then if he can stand still and look cool and let somebody else talk for him, you'll have a star with Nick Comoroto. That would be probably my best guy, is Nick Comoroto. I also am a big fan. Well, Willie Hobbs was one of the guys I was talking about before. I'm glad to see him finally making it. So I think Nick Comoroto would probably be the one guy in AEW that I would say I would push him, and he's completely out of the box. As far as WWE is concerned, that's a good question, because I don't know who's completely out of the box there. It'd probably be some NXT talent. Like, I really like Tony D'Angelo, but he's pretty much everybody's guy. Like, he's not a secret weapon or anything like that. Pretty much, if Tony D'Angelo can stay on the straight and narrow and keep his character work together, he ought to be good. I don't see any reason why he wouldn't be, unless somebody threw a monkey wrench in his plans. So for WWE, I don't know, but AEW, definitely Nick Comoroto. He should have been. I mean, just look at the dude, and it doesn't matter if he can't work a 15-minute match. It doesn't matter. Not everybody needs to do that. You give him his own slice of the show where he crushes guys in 2 minutes. He looks like a badass. People will cheer. Kids will be in awe of this human being, and we'll all make up a ton of money. And if he fizzles out, so what? The money is made. That's kind of how WCW had that attitude with Bill Goldberg. Okay, if the money fizzles out, look at how much money we made, and he didn't, last 10 years. So what? Raw asks another question. Any thoughts on the Smart Busters? Just watched some of their stuff for the first time recently. This is the one question I did see prior to sitting down and doing this recording, because I had no idea who the Smart Busters were. And so I went to the channel and I watched 5 minutes of them raking some guy called AEW Freak over the coals. And as much as I like, to bust the chops of AEW sexuals, I think it's kind of punching down to, even though I think they might have substantial followings, I don't really like to attack the fans personally. I like to attack the journalists. That's my thing. So I don't have a problem with what they do. It's probably funny, but and it's complete fodder. There's so many guys out there to make fun of, and they're so dorky and nerdy and stupid. But at the same time, because they're so dorky and nerdy and stupid, it's not any fun. It's only fun to laugh, not to, to jab them repeatedly and get them to quit and, delete their channels and all that kind of stuff. But the 5 minutes that I did watch of their 1 hour video, it was okay, but it was just okay. All right. Trevin Dorn, do you have any comic book omnibuses to read or like to read old comic books? Yes, I do. I have I have an Iron Fist omnibus, believe it or not. I was a big fan of Iron Fist. And I'm not saying it is the greatest shit in the world, but I do have Iron Fist Omnibus. I do have the Star-Lord Omnibus, that features a lot of the older when when Peter Quill was a complete and total asshole in space before they decided to make him Captain Kirk. He was like this dipshit in space that was completely and totally obsessed with finding the people who murdered his mother. And it got to the point where he was pulling guns on people who hadn't done anything. It was like completely and totally off the wall nonsense. Like the Peter Quill that everyone knows from the Guardians of the Galaxy, the recent comics and the movie and stuff like that. That's not what Star-Lord was created to be. That is not. He was basically a space cowboy, and he had a ship that was in love with him that could turn into a woman. It was really crazy. So I have that. I have the omnibus for the big Inhuman story in space. What was it? War of Kings. I really liked War of Kings. I have the omnibus for that. I have the omnibus for. I have a what's that? Marvel, the black and white. I think it's black and white. I'll probably have to look at my collection, but it's Luke Cage, and it doesn't have his origin story, but it has. I have this origin story in like a floppy. It was like $1, so it wasn't like I have like some $700 floppy or anything like that. But I have this black and white Marvel collection that they put out on Luke Cage. I thought that was pretty dope too, so I copped that around the time I was watching the TV show, and I was really into Luke Cage. I also have a couple of omnibuses or omnibuy, however that works. Frank Miller's Daredevil. I love Frank Miller's Daredevil. It's fantastic. It's fantastic stuff, without question. I have the omnibus of V for Vendetta. I have the omnibus for Watchmen, which is of course the full graphic novel, all 12 issues. I gotta tell you, the first time I read Watchmen, I was blown away. The fourth time, I was like, you know what? This shit boring. I was like, at one point, I just hit a wall with Adam. Like, I was really, really into Alan Moore. And then out of nowhere, one day, I was like, I can't finish this. This sucks. It was just boring. I don't know why. Because I really, really, really liked Watchmen. Especially when I didn't mind the movie. I didn't hate the movie as much as other people did. I really was blown away. And those were my first comic books. I got into comic books really late. So those are like my first comic books was V for Vendetta and the Watchmen. I just bought the classics that everybody told me to buy. Like, oh, if you're going to read comic books, you should read these. I'm like, okay, well, whatever. And I grabbed them joints. But I don't think I could finish Watchmen today. I don't think I could finish it. But yeah, I have a couple of omnibuses. I probably have some more in there. I just can't think of them. I am looking forward to getting some Captain America. I have the omnibus for the really terrible Iron Man restart that they had in the 90s. What was it called? Heroes Reborn Iron Man. It was awful. Ugh, it was a terrible book. Oh, I have a couple of Christopher Priest Black Panther books too. I have the Reginald Hudlin one too. So I have the Reginald Hudlin omnibus for Black Panther. I have 2 of the, or maybe 3 of the 4 Priest omnibuses for Black Panther. I got the omnibus for Punisher too. Punisher Max. I don't have all of them. I think I might have maybe the first or the second. I'm not sure. I have to look at directly in my collection to tell you which ones, but I have quite a few. It was for a while there, that's all I bought because I didn't like buying floppies. And I still don't like buying floppies, to be quite honest. Mr. VXG, what was your favorite world champion reign? Mine is a tie between King Booker and Ron Simmons. My favorite world championship reign was probably Shawn Michaels 1996. Mainly because I really love the storyline with Diesel. They paid off a 2-year story with the Diesel thing. Because Diesel was leaving, so they paid that off. Then they went into that crazy soap opera shit with the British Bulldog, which, you know, your taste may vary on that. But I thought it was funny. You know, the whole point of the thing was to knock Shawn off his game and to distract him so Bulldog can win. Of course, it didn't happen. And then all the stuff with Vader, I think that was, you know, well, stuff with Mankind, I think it was after that. Or maybe it was before, one or the other. But I was really into the Mankind feud, of course, the Mind Games pay-per-view. The Vader stuff, I could kind of forgettable for me. But I really dug the Sid stuff. So that's one of my favorites, and I really got a kick out of. I really got a kick out of that. Another favorite world title run that I have. I really like the early. Oh, shit, well, it's right on the tip of my tongue. I think it might have been Bret Hart. Was it his first run, the '92 run, where he wrestled. He ended up wrestling Razor, and the stretch of matches he had up until not SummerSlam, but WrestleMania against Yokozuna. I wasn't really a big fan of the Yokozuna match. Wasn't a really big fan of Yokozuna. His second run was fun as hell too, because that was all the Owen stuff, and that was great. That featured his run with Owen, and it ended. He won the title in WrestleMania 10. He lost it to Bob Backlund at Survivor Series. So he wrestled from April to November as the champion. He had a pretty good run there. So it's probably between Bret and Shawn being champion at that point in time. Reality with an exclamation point. What was your least favorite year in wrestling? My favorite year, probably 1997. 1997 is when WWE really started to change. And I can tell you almost pinpoint the time, WrestleMania 14. Because WrestleMania 14 is when shit hit the fan. I mean, it really hit the fan. That's when they took not WrestleMania 14, I'm sorry, WrestleMania 13. Because it wasn't quite Attitude Era yet, but it was leaning in that direction. And I remember watching WrestleMania 13 for the first time, and it was still some remnants of the new generation there. Like you had Rocky Maivia versus the Sultan. So there was still some of the stuff that I was already familiar with. But then you had the Legion of Doom and Ahmed Johnson versus the Nation of Domination. And there's dudes with nooses. They got black dudes who put nooses around each other's necks. It was wild, man. like it got crazy. Then of course, Steve Austin and Bret Hart. That whole thing, they started in 97. That thing, like, Undertaker won the title again, so I was really lit on that. Because that was my dude. And I've been waiting for Undertaker to win the title again. So I was lit on 97. By the end of the year, it was my favorite year, because they had the Hell in a Cell. You had Shawn being a complete and total asshole. The heel turn for Bret at SummerSlam. Everything about that year was lit. It was absolutely lit. 97 was awesome. 95, though. Just 2 years prior. Man, 95 is tough. It's really tough. Even the guys who normally, like, 95 is all Bret and Shawn. Like, that's it. If you watch 95, only guys you really should be paying attention to are Razor, Bret, Shawn, and maybe Owen. But just about everybody else was doing absolutely nothing. There was hog pin matches. The Crybaby match was in 96. But the lead up to the Crybaby match was in 95. I think that's when they turned the 1, 2, 3 Kid heel. It was an interesting idea, but of course they didn't really do anything with it. WrestleMania 11, horrible event. It was so bad. It was awful. It was an awful event. Bad. The year don't really go right if WrestleMania sucks that year. You could pretty much tell, like, okay, this year is going to be rough. Because, that's the end of the year's storyline. So that means they got to start again. And it didn't really get out the box in 95. Then, of course, I think the Lex Luger thing. No, that was in 94. Wasn't it? Yeah, it was in 94. No? Yeah, it was in 94, yeah. So 95 was probably my least favorite year. Like, 95 was really bad. It was awful, man. And that was the year they almost went out of business. So I'm not surprised. The best thing about 95, I think, was probably Survivor Series. Survivor Series 95 was fun. That was a fun event. That's when I think you had, wasn't it Bret and Diesel in the main event? Yeah, Bret and Diesel in the main event. You had that great Survivor Series match with Shawn and Ahmed Johnson. And I think Sid was on their team too. Don't get me trying to remember all those names. But it's that great Survivor Series match from 95. That was probably my favorite event from 95, the Survivor Series. Everything else was the shits. Even the Rumble was the shits, as far as I'm concerned. I hate 95. What was your favorite cartoon growing up? Mine was Silverhawks. Well, this is also from Mr. VXG. All right, so my favorite cartoon was the X-Men. I love the X-Men animated series, and I love Spider-Man too. A lot of people, everybody knows X-Men. Everybody talks about X-Men. I think Spider-Man went under the radar, but that's really when I became a Spider-Man fan. 'Cause again, I didn't have comic books. I was too broke, but I had a TV, and so I was definitely watching Spider-Man and X-Men, and then I stumbled into Dragon Ball, and from there I just basically didn't have any favorite cartoons because once I started watching Dragon Ball, I started watching anime. That kind of took over, so I missed kind of the Batman the animated series and Superman and the Justice League and a lot of the other stuff that guys like. I like Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles too. Like when I finally did find the cartoon, I liked it, but as far as I need to watch this, leave me alone. It was most definitely X-Men and Spider-Man. Like those were my shits. Alex Coquito, Coquito, Coquito. It got a little nice little flourish on the I. What's the future with the Forbidden Door in about 2 years? I don't think there will be a Forbidden Door in 2 years. To be quite honest, I don't see that AEW is going to. I think if AEW is still around in 2 years, they're not going to need Impact, and they might not even want to deal with Impact. I think by that point, Impact is going to have degraded to the point where it's not going to be worth anything to do anything with them anyway. New Japan will likely still be around, and they'll still have relationships with New Japan because New Japan has a wrestling audience that AEW likes to play with. And that's the audience that they're really doing damage to. They're really doing damage to New Japan. Because and New Japan is doing the smart thing by trying to resist sending any top stars to AEW. No Okada, no Jay White, no Tanahashi, no Naito. They'll send Tomohiro Ishii. They'll send Yuji Nagata. They're top guys, though. They're doing a good job of, trying to keep those guys away from Dynamite. Because look at what Tony Khan did to NWA. And I think that whole thing with NWA is probably going to be shaky, too. Because every time they've done business with the NWA, Tony Khan has walked away with one of their stars. Every single time. They did a short-lived thing with the NWA. They ended up walking away with Ricky Starks. Tony Starks. They ended up walking away with Ricky Starks. The next time they started doing some stuff with the NWA, they walked away with with Thunder Rosa. They're poaching the hell out of all of the other smaller promotions. I think if the Forbidden Door still exists in 2 years, it's going to be because AEW really, really needs it. And it's going to be the only way to keep interest in their product. But I don't see them, if they continue doing well and there's no major injuries or deaths or anything like that that will cripple the show, I don't think they will need the Forbidden Door in 2 years, and then it'll just kind of be something that was for Kenny Omega's push in the United States, and that'll be it. King Smart, what are your thoughts on mixed martial arts and boxing? Well, I like both. I'm not dedicated to either one of them, but I like both. I was a big boxing fan growing up because my dad loves boxing. So you sit down and watch the fights. I have a book called King of the World. I'm looking at it right now. It is a sort of a biography of Muhammad Ali, but it's not about Muhammad Ali. It's about his opponents. And it's an awesome book. It's fantastic. It's the one, I only got one book on boxing. So that's it. But MMA is another thing I really liked. I will watch UFC if it's on. I will not go out of my way to watch it though. But I was a big fan of UFC when guys like Rampage Jackson were top guys. When Anderson Silva was there, Anderson Silva was my favorite fighter. When George St. Pierre was there, I was a big fan of that. I never really got over the Matt Serra thing. That was tough to sit through. That was tough. When Matt Serra beat GSP, I was sick. But boxing, I fell off of boxing when it became almost completely European. When like Lennox Lewis and the Klitschko's were the champions and stuff like that, boxing was dead to me at that point. 'Cause I was like, there's nobody worth watching. Sure, some of the smaller guys, but then you have Floyd Mayweather. He ducks most of his opponents. He waits until guys are washed up and beat up like he did with Shane Mosley and stuff like that. So I was like, ah. But boxing is hard to get into because of that. And I don't know if you know, and I'm gonna say it here. Vox, which owns Cage side seats and bloody elbow. Vox is a cesspool of SJWs and progressive bullshit. They have been trying to get the Muhammad Ali Act passed on the UFC to make MMA like boxing. The problem is only a small number of boxers make a lot of money. Most boxers don't make shit. And they're comparing, Conor McGregor to, Canelo Alvarez or something like that. And Canelo Alvarez is a complete and total, he's an exception to the rule. These guys going to make if you can guarantee somebody $40 million, then you're not talking about being based on production anymore. You're just talking about, we're going to get this guy $40 million. Now, you're sure you're going to make the money back because Canelo Alvarez is a huge draw in Mexico. But you can't do that in MMA. There's no $40 million fighter in MMA. There's just no way. And because of MMA, the way they can't protect the fighters, the UFC won't let you protect these guys too much because they're trying to put on the best fight. In boxing, you can protect guys. You can have a guy be undefeated for 5 years and he never fought anybody. And then the first time he get in a real fight, he gets fucked over. That's typical of boxing. I just remember a guy like Amir Khan. They're trying to sell you that Amir Khan was so great. And then you find out Amir Khan got a glass chin. He's a good boxer, but he wasn't what everybody was yelling at he was at the time. And he got flattened. And I thought that was hilarious. Because I was like, he's just another guy who, fought a couple of tomato cans. He got his jaw broken. I think he got knocked out one time before the time I saw. And I was just like, well, whatever. This is boxing. They will sell you some bullshit and a bullshit fighter. He'll come out with 400 belts. And, you'd be like, I don't know what any of that stuff means. That's why I don't watch boxing that much anymore. Boxing doesn't have any real stakes. You don't really get anything out of boxing. It's horseshit. But MMA is fun. I was watching Ernesto Hoost versus Bob Sapp on K1 fights back when I was a kid. I was a teenager. I should have been in college. Not college, but high school. They used to show those fights on ESPN at 2 a.m. I used to stay up and tape them. I used to love K1. I still do watch kickboxing if I can find it. They don't do a really good job of promoting anything other than UFC. And I followed some UFC and some MMA accounts because I do still follow MMA. I just don't have any favorite fighters and stuff like that anymore. Anderson Silva and GSP were my guys. When they were gone, I just kind of was I drifted away. Darren Miles, do you think the Attitude Era was the best thing that ever happened to the wrestling business or the worst thing that ever happened to the wrestling business? I think it was probably the worst. It was the worst because it took wrestling away from wrestling and turned it into the variety show that it is now. Vince had already done stuff that was kind of silly with the skits and everything, but he had already done a good job of setting aside time for that, where he would still have his matches and he would still have guys that were serious, and then you would have your goofballs, But then in the Attitude Era, the stars became the goofballs. The Generation X, and they're trying to get girls to pull their bras out, and Road Dogg is humping dudes, and these guys are getting a lot of time every week, and they're stars. And The Rock is doing 5-10 minute stand up monologues, doing Saturday Night Live sketches in the middle of the ring and shit, and Mankind is out there doing comedy, and then all of a sudden all the top guys are doing comedy. So it's I really, really, really hated that shit, and that was sort of the I think 98, 99 was sort of the turning point when The Rock started kind of becoming a bigger star than Steve Austin. That's when you started seeing so much comedy, and it really started getting aggravating for me. I was really getting pissed. But so I think it's not the best, because I think the wrestling became the least important part of it. And I think it went too far with that. I am a full believer in keeping matches short between people who are not over. And Attitude Era was smartly did that. But I also think that they did too much in terms of they had a guy eat a dog, man. They did a storyline where a guy's dog got killed and got fed to him. Fuck you. Why would you do that? It's fucked up. We can do storylines that are that are, edgy and, some guy bangs some guy's wife. I'm like, okay. But that whole thing where I'm going to kill your dog and feed it to you, like, bro, that's sick. Like that's, that's truly sick. And other people act like it didn't happen. I'm like, bro, this was the Attitude Era. Like that's fucked up. I'm not even an animal rights guy. It's just fucked up. Like psychologically fucked up. I know he didn't feed him a real dog. But that's not the point. The point is it was fucked up. And it led to the Kennel from Hell match. Fuck you. Hell no. That shit was awful. But I think the worst thing that it did is it turned wrestling into Tickle Me Elmo. It's like, oh yeah, Elmo still exists in 2021. But is it still Tickle Me Elmo? Absolutely not. It's never going to be that again. And that's really my big problem. Is that as Ed Ferrara and Vince Russo sat down and drafted up all these episodes of Monday Night Raw that were based off of them watching Jerry Springer, what they ended up doing is in creating storylines for everybody, which is a good thing. They did a lot of stuff that they probably shouldn't have. They crossed a lot of boundaries they probably shouldn't have. And the wrestling got lost in that. And you got to put the wrestling first. You got to do everything else on the outside. You got to have a match because you need to have matches. But you got to also be able to get over personalities. And that's the good thing that they did. But the commercialization of the Attitude Era and, the gangbuster business that they were doing ended up hurting them in the long run because you can't maintain that. That's simply not maintainable. That level of success or that level of stardom for guys conked out. That's why The Rock was gone in 3 years. The Rock's entire WWF run was 4 years. His entire run was 4 years. If you run a corporation and you have good 4 years, you can make a lot of money. But you intend to run the corporation for 20 to 30 years, right? So 4 years and compared to 20 or 30 means nothing. Now his 4 years kept them running for a long time. But in reality, it really didn't do anything but turn the business into, like a cow that you just kind of kept trying to milk the same shit over and over again. But the WWF did that to themselves with, the extensive marketing that they did. And that also led to a lot of the other problems that they started to have with politicians and parents' councils and stuff like that. The Attitude Era, did a lot of damage to the business, despite the fact that it was very successful. Because now you can't even do some of the stuff that they was doing in 96. You can't even do that stuff now. So, like, that's kind of how it is. Something like Goldust would get snatched from the air. First week it aired. And there would be an apology. Oh, I'm sorry for what we did with this Goldust character. Come on. They almost canceled Joe Gacy for being a little bit over the line. So the reason why we have such a sanitized product today is because you got so much rawness for those 3 or 4 years in the 90s. I hate anti-smarks. Name your 5 worst types of wrestling fans. All right. The Lipstick Alley wrestling fans are number 1. That would be the fans of female wrestlers. If they have a female wrestler in their avatar, they're probably mentally ill. And this not have nothing to do with them being a fan of female wrestling. It has almost everything to do with them being absolute maniacs. They are stans. And that shit is frightening. It is absolutely frightening to get into that beehive. I've fucked around with the Sasha Banks fans once. It's not fun. Like, when I used to go on like all hip hop and stuff like that, I used to fuck with the Beyonce fans and stuff like that. That shit wasn't fun either. Like it gets fun for a while because you get to you just batting at them, and then like I used to call it like Beyonce a robot and shit, say she had no personality, which I don't. I still believe she doesn't have a personality. So when I used to do that kind of shit, the Bayhive, I didn't know what I was expecting, but it was more than I was ready for. they took. I'm not afraid to say I took an L to the Bayhive, but I was by myself. And the same way when you start dealing with like the Io Shirai fans and the oddly enough the Tegan Knox fans, I didn't know people were that rabid about Tegan Knox. Like Christ's sake. So they're number 1. Number 2 would probably be the AEW fans, mainly because a lot of them are beta males and they're real emotional and sensitive. So, you know, they get very upset at you too. And they'll do crazy stuff like they've been doing to the AEW botches account, trying to dox that guy. All the false flagging that they do, like the Stan accounts don't do a lot of false flagging. They will, you know, try to drag you for hours and hours and hours, but they don't false flag. The AEW fans will false flag you to death. And you can probably go look at Girl on Cinema, what they've been able to do to her. Like they've taken down one of her channels and they're constantly false flagging her stuff. Constantly. Even when her stuff is within fair use, the AEW fans are constantly false flagging her. Like, it's sickening. So that would be my second. My third, the New Japan fans. Only because they're so fucking elitist. They're not as rabid and mentally ill as the other two groups. They're the kind of guys who are, you know, it's like being a guy who drinks beer and going into the winery. You know, all these guys with their stuffy shirts and they're talking about, you know, the 3-act structure of some Tomohiro Ishii match. You're like, fuck you. This match sucks. You're like, how dare you talk about Tomohiro Ishii that way? How do you not understand the quality of his contests? You're like, man, look, you know, this guy's fucking boring. He sucks. You know, like, watching WWE is like shopping at Walmart. It's like eating at McDonald's. You know, it's the lowest common denominator. Watching New Japan is like trying to be a guy who, you know, goes to these 4-star restaurants. It's like everything on the plate is boring because it's all appropriately sized and this is how the proportions are supposed to be on this steak. Look at how well done it is. It's perfectly medium rare. It's like, fuck you. This shit sucks. So that would probably be 3. The fourth is the smart accounts that are fans of fans. The guys who are fans of Solid Monster or fans of what's some other dipshits, Cultaholic, or the fans of, you know, those accounts, the Brian Zane fans and all those guys. Those guys are fucking weirdos, man. You know, they're just weird. They don't necessarily bother you, you know, but if you're in their territory, they can make it really hard on you. You know, like I don't even like I have my problems with Solid Monster, you know, as far as we got like long beef. It goes back a long way. Long before I even got on YouTube. Me and him butted heads quite a few times. But his fan base is, you know, most of them are absolute idiots. But they're not the worst. The Solid Monster fans, you know, you guys are not that bad. The worst were the British guys. The Wrestle View, the Wrestle Talks, the What Cultures, the Cultaholics. They're awful. They're the worst people. They're fucking terrible. The people who are fans, like Cage Side Seats fans too, really bad. The Vox, oh, they're awful. They're really bad. So a lot of people who are like fans of the wrestling journalists, the Meltzers and all those guys, what makes them so bad is because they think they're informed and they're only half informed at most, or they just repeat whatever the person that they follow says. And that's the worst thing. And that's really what kind of started pissing me off. Like, I don't care if you like the head slap guy from What Culture. I don't give a shit. But when he says something and it's treated like gospel, that's bullshit, bro. And I can't stand that. I hate that. I hate that, you know, with the heat of 1,000 suns. So my fifth least favorite fans will probably be the WWE Hardcores, because they take criticism. They're used to the criticism, so they're not as rabid or stupid. But they get busy. They get down. You know, they stand up for WWE. They really do. And they get annoying. You know, they really do get annoying. And sometimes it's too real to them. You know, and that's the problem with them. Again, a lot of them are Walmart shoppers. So that should tell you a little bit of something, you know, misspelled words, and they'll come at you pretty hard, but, you know, you're like, nah, these guys, it's not the right thing to do. And plus, since I'm I'm like a step above being one of them. It's not all that fun to fuck with them. But the Lipstick Alley wrestling fans, god fucking awful. Anybody who has a female avatar, you got an Io Shirai or a Sasha Banks, you're dangerous to fuck with because they got 1,000 friends. Even if they don't got like large accounts, they have like friends who have large accounts. The New Japan fans, the AEW fans, the fans of wrestling websites, they're all the absolute worst. Raw, how did you get into YouTube to begin with? Well, what ended up happening is I was supposed to run a channel. Like the weird thing is the name of the channel. So, so what happens was I said I was going to fuck around on YouTube. I was not working that often at the time. So I was like, all right, I like wrestling. Let's talk about some wrestling on YouTube. I told my homeboy, like, hey, let's do this wrestling show on YouTube. He's like, all right, cool. But he got kids and everything, so it didn't quite work out. I ended up doing it by myself. So I just started messing around with it. I think it was around the time that the Tessa Blanchard thing had just dropped. And everybody was calling her a racist. And I think those were like the first videos I did. And I was just doing them for fun. It wasn't like I was serious about it. I didn't even plan to do a video a day. But I ended up doing like 3 that day. Because it was so much fun and me going back and forth talking about Tessa Blanchard. And that's, it turns into what it is now. But I ended up doing YouTube partially because I was tired of listening to what I felt was a lot of the wrestling journalists and the media space basically saying the same thing over and over again. Like we listen to like wrestling journalists and wrestling stuff, and a lot of these guys just seem to repeat themselves or they repeat each other and they quote each other, and you never really get a unique perspective at any point in that shit. It's if one person liked it, then everybody's supposed to like it, especially if that one person was like a tastemaker, then everyone likes it. So it started being whatever Meltzer gave it, that's what the match is. And Meltzer said it's 3 stars, and it's 3 stars, and nobody shall disagree with him. And I was just kind of like, that sucks. That doesn't work. And I started seeing like a lot of the lies. That's also, because I'm like, even if it's, just critically think this thing. Sometimes this shit doesn't make sense when you really sit down and consider it. So it was that kind of led me and my homeboy to really want to put the channel together. And while I was waiting to come up with a team name for it, I just started it under what had my Twitter handle was, which is after I just watched the movie Let's Do It Again, and I was really just fucking around. It was like, okay, I'm gonna troll on Twitter because I didn't really have a Twitter account. And so I just ported my Twitter handle to my YouTube handle. And then I found out that other people were named MongoSlade on YouTube. So that's when it became the Magnificent MongoSlade. And people have been telling me just change it to 3 Count Commentaries. And like, eventually I will. But at least but the reason why it's not 3 Count Commentaries is because I do like to talk about politics on here sometimes. And I also like to talk about comic books on here sometimes. So I think MongoSlade is probably the best for that. If I move over to completely and only pro wrestling, then I probably would do only 3 Count Commentaries. So Darren Gordon Hill asked me why. And my answer to that question is why not? So thank you guys for submitting questions. Feel free to participate in the future. Thank you guys for listening. Like, share, and subscribe. And I'll talk to you guys later.